And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, December the 16th. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue number, I believe it was issue number 296. I've copied and pasted the HackMD doc for notes if you'd like to add yourself as an attendee, and we'll be following along there. Quick code of conduct acknowledgement, just that these calls and all communication in the RFC's repo is covered under code of conduct. We just ask that you be kind and please raise your hand if people are speaking, and I'll call on you. We have a short agenda today, but just a couple of announcements. I want to say that this is the last RFC call of the year. So I'm a bit festive today, but I just want to also say thank you to everybody that's been coming out to these calls this past year. It's been working quite well as a forcing function for us to continue to collaborate with the community and just give another mechanism for us to push forward features that we want to see made in the NPM client. We'll be returning in the new year, so Wednesday, January 6th, 2021 will be the first Open RFC call that we'll have in the new year. So feel free to book that in the calendar, and/or there's a link to the public events calendar, I think in one of the issues on the NPM RFC's repo and/or the README, I think. Great, Miles, I see you joined. Feel free to add yourself.
Hello.
Cool. So if there's nothing else, any other announcements folks want to bring up? If not, we'll dive right in. So the three items we have are listed there, the first of which issue number 287. I believe this is the item that we want to do a deep dive on. The last action item, I think, was just to schedule that, as far as I'm aware. So this is the concept of providing a flag or a mechanism for changing the behavior of install to not hoist, let's say, workspace dependencies. I'm not sure what our notes said the last week that we spoke on this. I think it was just we need to set up a deep dive call. Is that right?
I think that's where we landed on it. Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, and clearly there was kind of some reasonable minds disagreeing about some things, but also the use cases are quite subtle. So there's a bunch of cases where no hoist is absolutely terrible, and a bunch where that's actually what you need is to not hoist things and treat each workspace as top level deps. And even some cases where you kind of need a mix, where you need like this thing to be hoisted, but these other things not to be.
Okay. Let's then.
I think we did end up starting a deep dive last time, no?
We do have a doc. No, we did a bit of a deep dive on workspaces. I think was the thing that we talked a little bit about. We did have a long discussion about no hoist about, I would say, like a month back. We took up a good 20-30 minutes on this. But I'm going to remove the agenda label for now on this specifically. And then I'm going to take the action to set up a call for that specifically. And then we'll I'll make an issue and I'll poke the relevant folks to hopefully join in the new year. So moving on to the RFC, and I'm not sure if we've created an RFC for this yet, but 275. So this is the registry protocol concept that Isaac, I know you've proposed. Again,
yeah, that's also, yeah. So the update on that is it's still where it was last week. It's somewhat uncontroversial. Just kind of need to write up the spec and then outline all the places where we need to do it. But in terms of the actual like DX and usage of it, yeah, it seems like everybody just wants it. So just a matter of just a typing problem.
Okay. And then I guess the last item that I just added here, I know we talked a little bit about it, the package maintenance working group yesterday, and I know Bradley has started to draft this PR. Did you want to maybe speak to the pull request 297? I believe this is introducing a permissions field.
I'm fairly open to whatever design it seemed. It seemed when we were discussing this with the package maintenance working group, they were centered on the idea of it being about needing incentives for package authors to put this in their package.json field. And that kind of ended up with me realizing that although in the previous RFC call I got sent there, that wasn't the right location for a discussion of such a field. Basically, the idea is we add some kind of field to package.json to allow package consumers to see what permissions are expected to be granted to packages. And so they can actually grant those or deny things that are not listed. This would require package authors to actually put in metadata in their package.json, either through an automated tool with static analysis or through some other means manually. In particular, some of the feedback was pretty clear that unless there was an incentive for package authors to do this basically in a way that made them feel joy, to not find a good way to put it, it wouldn't be meaningful in the package maintenance working group. They did have feedback that maybe a different tool, not within their working group, might be a better place for such an attempt. So we're making an npm RFC directly rather than trying to go through the Node working group. So I've listed some motivations and some things like that. But if you go and you look at user polls and things, surveys, people using Dino, people using browsers even, they really want to understand what permissions they're granting to things that they run. Currently, Node has a mechanism to enforce some levels of permissions. It's adding more. But there's no real way for you using the package managers, npm in this case, to actually show what permissions are being granted during running things. And there's no way for you to say you don't want to grant more permissions. And so what I'm proposing is a little bit twofold. We need a field for package authors to be able to list their expected required capabilities that they need for their package to work. And we go into a little bit of detail on why alternatives like a command line flag don't really appeal to things. So if we were to use Dino's approach, where you basically add a lot of command line flags, you get to cases where different packages are treated as being in the same security boundary. So let's say we had event stream. Event stream, the vulnerability is that it accessed the HTTP bindings in Node, and it started communicating with a remote server and doing some naughty things. But a lot of the apps that were actually vulnerable did want HTTP. They wanted it because they were running web servers. And so we need this kind of finer grained permissions model, kind of on a per package level. That's a bit complicated. But we want to be able to avoid specific incidents that we've seen in the past, like event stream. And so we need to be able to state things like, I want Express to have HTTPS, but I do not want event stream to have HTTPS. And so when you're installing things, if we use the command line flag, it would not be easy for a human to specify all those flags, as often people are installing without listing the dependencies. because they're installing from a package JSON. They're installing multiple packages at once because they put more than one on the command line. And so this also has a bad workflow where if you do this command line, you basically try to run with your granted permissions from the command line. It fails to run. You see the error. You add that permission to your command line, and you repeat until it runs. And so this works okay to some extent. It's not pleasant, but it also doesn't go through and state, oh, this feature, if you use it, will require a thing. So you need every invocation possible to use all the permissions possible to be sure that you've kind of guessed the right command line flags that you need to run your app. So instead, really relying on package authors to list their things is ideal.
Great. One thing, maybe I'll make a couple notes, and I see Jordan's hands up as well, so I'll give him some time. So just one clarification here as well. This is just a drafted PR so far, and I'm sure you're looking for some support and collaboration to make it more formal, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just want to it's not fully no fleshed out as it's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't fill out the details because I'm fairly open to whatever schema mechanism they want to use. Yeah.
Cool. You're just looking to try to solve a problem.
Correct. And it seems like this would work better with this group than the package working group. So
sure. I apologize. I moved the discussion over there, and then I think it makes sense to have it here. Cool. Go ahead, Jordan. I see your hands up.
Yeah, so I was in the discussion yesterday, and the things you're saying are clear, Bradley. It seems that me, at least, I did not do a good job of being clear, because that has nothing to do with what we were trying to say. I think the feature is good. I think what you sketched out in your RFC makes sense. I think it's the best approach to providing this extra signal for individual packages. Obviously you can't rely on it because of malicious authors, but you can use it as a signal to determine if it's changed or how risky the package is, and that's great. I think this is a good thing. What we were, I think, stemming on a bit yesterday in the call was that as a package author, how would I know what permissions to put, what magic strings to put in there so my package works? I have to be able to test it. People are going to ask me for this, and I have the number of people that ask me is going to influence how willing I am to put in effort to put in this field and justify the complexity in the npm CLI in the first place, right? Because if nobody ends up using it, right?
We didn't speak about the npm CLI yesterday.
No, I know. I'm sorry. I'm bringing that up right now. I'm saying if there should be something added to the npm CLI to make this feature most effective. I agree with that, and that's why and discussing that here is the best venue for that. But adding this complexity to the CLI needs to be justified by usage, theoretically, right? We can't know that in advance, but
so
if
this
no
is
one ends up using it, then it wasn't worth it.
You had yesterday. You want everything to be a carrot, and this is very much not a carrot style feature. You spoke that malicious authors could exploit this. So using policies, we have a strict security model. And if you list something, we will deny you everything else. So I don't understand how it would be exploited there.
Oh, I mean, as I can, if one version of a package doesn't request file system access and the next one does, the change might alert people that there's a problem, but you can't necessarily know what that's doing, whether that's legitimate or not. And then separately, if my package already needs file system permission, it could be the next version could do something malicious with the file system, right? So I was just pointing out that rely on is probably not totally accurate. Yeah, exactly.
The only way to prevent all security problems is to never run any code.
Yeah, right. And I'm not suggesting that diminishes the value of this as a feature. I continue to think it's valuable and that we should have it almost exactly as you sketched it out. What I'm saying is that in practice, if package authors don't end up adding it, the capability of like this capability won't end up being useful.
So maybe I can add one thing or note or
Sure.
idea here. And then Christian, I see your hands up, and I think Wes also had his hand up at one point. My guess is that there would have to be a default. If we're asking that there's a new thing that is a requirement for package authors to like add as a signal, right? Like that's why I think this is good as a function of, and then we can potentially have something that, you know, actually enforces around, you know, these permissions. Then there'd probably have to be a default to ensure that like historical packages that may never get updated essentially would have to default to asking for all permissions, right? Like that might be the default, is that a package, you know, author doesn't have to do anything. So the expectation is that they essentially are requesting all the potential permissions, right? So that might be like the baseline. It's like, you don't have to do anything. But you know what, like the packages and maintainers that want to, you know, create a safe ecosystem are adding these new, this new field, which essentially specifies, you know, the types of permissions that their packages want access to. And, you know, that's a good indicator, as you say, like a good indicator of like, you know, a package you probably want to be using, because they're starting to opt into this new like concept that, you know, is hopefully gonna make you know, the ecosystem a bit safer. So that's sort of like where my head goes, is like there would have to be some sort of baseline or ability to support, let's say, all the historical packages that have ever been created, without having to ask them to burden themselves with like updating their packages, and just saying that, you know, the default is that you request all access, and that is an indicator to me as the consumer of that package that I may not want to use it because I don't want to give it all this access, right? So,
Sure. Yeah.
So there's,
I think
once that Christian has had his hand up, and then
yeah,
feel free to rebuttal.
I was actually going into kind of the same direction as you were, Darcy. Like, I was a bit afraid that like people would put the default as in like, I just want every permission there is, because that's just simple. I mean, I can see this feature being useful, because like I can go to the security guy and just tell him like, you know, we're not doing anything bad. Like here's the printout, you can look at it. However, also like all those permissions, like, I don't know, they may convey something that is not there. Like, you might have granted a permission to something, but you're not using it because you're not using that feature of that library. Although I can't think of an example right now. So yeah, I'm all for it, but it's definitely harder to do.
An example, Christian, might be if you use browserify but pipe its output to something else, you may not need file system access. But if you pass the -O option, then you might. Babel does the same.
Right. Yeah.
Isaac, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting. I think that there's, where I'd like to go with this conversation is, you know, there's kind of two things that we're talking about here. One is, and I think Bradley, like you outlined it really eloquently, like we need to have per package or perhaps even per module permission settings, right? Because just saying it, you know, setting it for your entire application is kind of pointless. Like every Node application is touching the file system in the HTTP. Like, so if that's where I'm granting it, that doesn't make any sense. And it needs to be, you know, it would be good for it to be kind of declared by somebody who knows what this module is doing, i.e. the package author. Like that does make the most sense. So let's say, hypothetically, we have a thing in package JSON where you declare what permissions you need. and that's all that your module or anything in your, in that module scope kind of has access to. Maybe some of my dependencies or meta dependencies might have different permissions, right? And then that kind of becomes potentially like a loophole where, well, I'm not doing any file system access, but I'm using this other module which does, and it has permission to. And maybe that's something we want to do or don't want to allow. Like, we could figure that out later. Then the interesting question becomes, without burdening anybody with excess work or kind of unpleasant or tedious UX, how do we get to a place where most Node apps, where most of the modules in most Node applications have these declarations and they're active? So there's two things that I can think of. One is incentivizing the authors who do this, who opt into this. Could be as simple as sort of prioritizing them in our search algorithm. So, if you're searching for modules, you're going to find the ones that have declared a thing that declares its permissions over those that don't. The other thing that we can do, it's easy to talk about carrots and sticks, but I think often we forget about just like greasing the skids. So one of the, maybe even more effective than providing incentive is just making it the default and making it easy so that if you're lazy, this is what happens. And I don't see an obvious way to do that. Maybe we'll think of one if we keep kind of chewing on this, but we could have some kind of automated tool that looks at like which node modules, which node built-ins you require. And when you do npm init, it just automatically says like, hey, these are the permissions it looks like you're using. Is this right? Like, and then you can edit it. So everybody kind of starts off new packages in this new way. And then then I think it's, and so for legacy packages, we could also do something where potentially we like go through and look at and like run this same kind of init tool against all the packages in the registry and maybe start, sending out PRs or even just defaults to what we put in the pacument so that those things can kind of be brought forward. That's maybe a bigger project that we could put off until later. But for the initial step, I think we should think about I think that the feature as proposed is good. Then the question becomes like, how do we get people to use it? And my two kind of suggestions are just make it easy and prioritize in the search algorithm.
So yeah, I'd agree. I think there is value in the permissive by default because it doesn't break anything. I think,
yeah, if we break everybody on day one with this, like it's a non-starter, we're gonna have riots.
No, that's not a route I would even entertain.
Yep.
There are a couple of existing tools that do what you say, and other bundlers have basically the same capability. And so maybe it would make sense for a GitHub bot or something that people could tap into for it to scan their stuff. That's one approach. Like you said, you could kind of do it as an author manually. I don't think that that'll be super clear. But if things do show up in the search, I don't think you should have the default all permissions show up as all the component permissions, really, because it'll scare people into thinking, oh, I'm using a JSON parser and it's requesting child process permissions, which
right. I think even if we're in permissive,
not really.
Even if we're in permissive by default, what it should basically say is something like this thing has not detailed its permission requirements.
Yeah.
So I see Jordan and Wes have their hands up. I think Jordan, you were first, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think that in addition to search results and npm init, which are great suggestions for greasing the skids, as it were, I think I have no idea and haven't looked into it, but how to use policies. But if it becomes super easy to, as a package author, run my tests with policies enabled to see what permissions, like, so that I can see if I've added the right permissions to make my package work, then I think that would also help, because then a PR to my package to add permissions could also add the tests for that. And then my argument for not accepting that PR is basically gone.
Yeah, so I noted in chat, like the improvements or like adding tests to npm doctor might help. So npm doctor should be, could function as like a mechanism for discovering whether or not your permission, like the packages you have installed are permissioned.
Does Node have like a permission auditing mode? So like run with all permissions, but then at the end of the process, be like, here's what you did.
So you can put log, just put log as your policy, just on error log, just a JSON object, and it'll roughly do that.
So you could write a tool that basically does exactly that, right? Like you could.
But I mean, the way Lava works is essentially it tries to do the same thing at runtime without Node integration, and like it can print out essentially a module map of which modules have accessed which types of scary things. It's not robust because it's heuristics and stuff, but I'm wondering if maybe Node could have something like that where I could just run my tests with this mode enabled and it would spit out a JSON file, and then I could programmatically verify that my permissions match what's in that JSON file.
I mean, that wouldn't be hard to do. We've got,
Cool.
It would just be redirecting that log to a specific file.
Yeah, I mean, just anything that wraps it all, whatever it is, anything that wraps it all up in a way that is trivial for the package author, I think that also goes a long way to incentivizing it. Because I think if it's easy and prevents regressions and is automated largely, I think that it's going to be a really hard, like, I can't imagine package authors being like, no, I don't want to increase my users' confidence that my package isn't doing bad things, right? So like, but without those things, it becomes a more subjective gray area.
No, it's more like, why did you give me extra homework? This isn't worth it.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But if the PR can arrive with all those things done, or if like a package author who's motivated to do it can like easily do it, then it seems like at that point I would easily do it on all of my packages because I would have confidence that I was doing the right thing and that it wouldn't break in the future.
Wes, I know you've had your hand up for a bit. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I think all these ideas are great, and I think all of them sound like they're going to make for a much more straightforward user experience for package authors. I'd like to talk a little bit about what the application authors get once they have this world where all the module authors have, or package authors have, is sort of instrumented their packages. So I see the sort of main ask is have the package installer read through all of these at install time and generate a policy, right? Which is great because it avoids the currently rather tedious thing that you mentioned, which is run your process with nothing, add one, see if it works, iterate until you finally get a fully running app, right? Which obviously is going to be a pretty much non-starter for most actual application authors. I say most, obviously not all. I wonder though, even with all of this instrumented, I still think there's this trust model, because now all I'm going to, so if it changes, I'm going to see an error, right? Because it will fail to start because the policy that was generated originally isn't there. So then my process would be, okay, what changed? Okay, this package now asked for file system permission. What is the average engineer going to do to investigate whether or not it's fine to say yes, right? The process that I go through when I get a CVE report in an application is like super painful for me. And I've been on teams where I'm the only one who does that. And then I find that it's not applicable, right? And and it is problematic. The times that it has been applicable have actually been times where it wasn't even running a node thing. It was curling a remote server, which this doesn't catch, presumably, because the thing would have already been asking for child process permissions. If it was going to be a malicious package, right, you would have constructed it such that it was added to execa or something, right, as a transitive. So transitive, it's already asking for child process, something to that nature, where you would try to figure out how to slide it in under an already requested permission. And at that point, me as an application author, I'm still basically just at the point of saying yes, without, unless I go and do a ton of extra work to go and investigate exactly how that thing is using that new API it just requested. So I'm wondering, if we do all this work to get this, instrumented, have we really meaningfully changed the security for the end user, who is the one who has to say yes or no?
So,
and if so, how?
Sorry, finish your thought there.
I think that was it. The end question was just, we do all this, which I think it sounds all great on paper. I just want to make sure that we're driving toward an end goal where the how are we meaningfully changing the end user's experience in a way that improves their security and confidence in their code?
Sure.
Without just saying yes to it, right? Because that's
sure.
I think the tendency for a lot of people is just to be like, yes, accept.
So a couple things, and I see, Isaac, you still have your hand up. I'm not sure if you'll add in.
I dropped it and put it back up.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you the floor here in a sec, and then maybe we can put a time frame on this a little bit. I did have a list of discussions I wanted us to follow up on. So maybe give another 5 minutes to this discussion. But one thing to note there, just based on what you just said, Wes, I don't think security is like binary. Like, I think that it's incremental. You make things safer over time. And I think that this is like, this won't get us all the way there in completely securing like your applications, but like, it's like, improvements over time are going to make it better. And so I think that this, like, at least for me, I see this as being like a step in the right direction. It's not going to solve everything, right? Like, it's not going to solve all your security issues. So like, that's how I look at this sort of proposal, right? But again,
yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm a big fan of incremental improvements, of
so
which I think the ability to do this is absolutely an incremental improvement. But I just want to make sure we're very clear on how this is going to impact the end user, right? Which we haven't, I don't think the couple of the documents I've read have really covered that in a way that is unique, it's clear to me, right?
Sure.
So
and it's how we design it. And go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, I want to speak to that specifically a little bit. So I think we can safely assume that most developers are not Wes, and as a result, most developers are just going to click accept, because that's how I get my job done and go on to the next thing. Where this ends up being valuable and providing some value to that, rationally lazy developer who is just accepting everything, is that later on, like, we are creating an ongoing record of what permissions have been granted at which time to which modules. So, I go through my normal day-to-day work and I'm updating things and I'm just accepting whatever permission changes they want to make. At some point, there is a CVE because there's a module version that is doing some bad thing. One of the questions that always ends up being really challenging to answer is, are we actually vulnerable to it? And for how long have we been vulnerable to it? And in the worst case, like, have we been actually owned, not just vulnerable, but, successfully attacked? So that's a question that this kind of ongoing record would help you answer, right? So you could say, like, did we install MaliceBot 2000? And the answer is yes. Okay, but did we give it the permissions to run child processes? Yes, we did on, March 13th, and then we revoked them on March 17th. And so, like, let's go look in that time frame. So in that case, like, we have a record, we have an artifact that can be tracked. It doesn't mean you're safe from attack. It means that you can recover more effectively from an attack. And that's, you know, that's not nothing. That's actually
That,
pretty valuable.
that sold me. I mean, that's what I was
Okay.
saying. That's what I was looking for, is what is the story that we're trying to tell here that says this is worth it? And that to me is actually super, that's right on point. Thank you.
I mean, it's similar to the benefit of checking in a package log file, right? If you're deploying an application, checking in the log file means that later on down the road, if I find out that there's some problem, I have, even if it's not easy, it's possible to like go through and audit like which dependencies were in use where. And we've seen this leveraged by, you know, like the GitHub vulnerability detection and other products and stuff from Sonatype and JFrog. Like that has actually provided some hooks for other state-of-the-art security stuff to build up more safety.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it would be very useful then to start, when this feature is rolled out, with some sort of blog post or great documentation that says, here is the best way to use it and why, and very strongly recommend committing it to the repository, the output, whatever the artifact is, because if you don't, the traceability, if it's not committed, goes way down, you know, in value. And I see Bradley's face. So I'm actually love to hear what Bradley thinks on this, because you brought up some stuff that I hadn't thought about with having it in the same directory structure, which is good. And I haven't.
It can be copied out. That's fine. But you don't want it in the same directory structure itself, because often the directory structure on containers and stuff is on a mutable FS. And so it could be stored in Git. That's fine. But when actually running it, a best practice would be to copy it somewhere else and use that.
So that might
because
be
that file system would be mutable?
No, because you can more easily lock down an individual file than trying to deal with all the permissions on different directories.
So like something had file system write access to the policy file, right? The attack would be that it changes the policy file before executing, right? Is that?
No, because there's a command line flag that checks the integrity of the policy file itself.
So what's the risk? Because I don't know, I don't have enough familiarity.
So in general, it's just a best practice. It's not really going to be a make or break thing. It was much more a risk before we had that flag. Like, policies continue to slowly get features as we see attacks on them. So.
Okay, having clarity on that would be really valuable, because that to me makes the feature compelling, right? And that's going to be very important to justify investment, right? Like if I'm going to go to my coworkers at Netflix and say, look, because I've been asking this, I'm like, we got this policy API, should we be using it? And like the answer has just been, well, we have a what API? Like I didn't know about that, right? And so when I go to them with this story and say, look, I want to help make these applications more secure by using this policy API, I need to have that answer, right? Here's the best practices, here's what it does for you, and here's how we're going to roll it out. And to me, now that I understand like the auditability is really the sort of core strength, I think I could make that case much better than I could before that. And so that's where I would like to see if there is some big concern about having it in the same directory, and if everybody has their packages, with package.json at the root, then like, how would I do it correctly is like sort of the story that needs to be worked out for this rollout to succeed, in my opinion.
Yeah, with that integrity flag, Bradley, I would love to understand why it still would make a difference if it was in the repo, because the usability of the stuff is very diminished if it has to be outside the project. Or
it doesn't have to be. It's just you have to be more careful, because if you mutate it, you'll get a denial of service because your app will never start up.
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to be mindful of time here. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I think there's been some really good discussion here. I'm wondering what some like next steps could be, so we keep this rolling, because I think there's some general like consensus that this is a good idea to implement.
So it sounds like the feedback was we need to have a written out description of application, authors, what's their delta over time and experience. That needs to be written up. We need to write up defaults, expected, and separately, it seems like we need to spin up a different project for making a GitHub bot that uses the existing static analysis tools and write up a document on best practices once we get this field kind of in place so that we can actually write up the best practices before we actually move past design.
And so I know that you have like an example or just like hypothetical example of like grant equal FS and grant HTTP. Is that list, are those mapping right one-to-one with like the, is that list well defined right now of what all the permissions could be?
Those were alternatives we could look at. Grants are just going to be URLs. So every node built in actually lives at node:/FS or whatever in policies. And in newer versions of Node, that's true in stack traces and the debugger as well. So
we could get that
yeah,
list
I noticed
easily.
that. Yeah. Broke all my tap stack trace mungers.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I like it. It's a better naming convention than, you know, lib/_internal/node, whatever.
It fixed some dev tools. That wasn't me.
Yeah.
So we could make that list happen though. We could like say this is the what potentially. Yeah.
Yep.
So adding that I think would also be helpful in the RFC as well. Bradley.
Sure.
Cool. So there's some actions there. We can also, I'm not sure, Roy, I appreciate that you've been taking notes. I'm not sure if you got those last few things as awesome. Thank you. Cool. And Isaac, I noticed you said one thing on Slackbots. I'm not sure if you want to. Okay. Or sorry, that was Jordan. Sorry, I apologize. I was trying to read chat at the same time as my brain to mouth is not working right now. Yeah, so maybe if we can get some other discussion as well, like if you have any other feedback you want to give to this RFC, feel free to add comments async. But yeah, this sounds pretty good, something that we can work on in the new year together. I want to quickly circle back on, there's a number of discussions that haven't got much feedback to them. I was hoping that maybe we could run through in the last sort of 15 minutes time here. I could pull up potentially the list that I had and see if we can maybe close out some of these or give some, add some light to maybe answer some of these at the end here. So if people are okay with that, I'm gonna switch over to sharing my screen and just making sure I have nothing sensitive on my computer. And awesome, share my screen. So everybody can see that. So yeah, this list is just pulled from the discussions that we have actually open in the RFC repo. I know, Jordan, I appreciate you've been pretty active in issues and discussions lately. So this discussion number 292, make node modules folder more space efficient by having a production flag to install only the files used. So I'm not sure, Jordan, like you obviously asked the question here. I'm not sure if we can like answer this. The title sums it up.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds nice, but like if there was a way in JavaScript to statically know all the used files, then I suspect Bradley's policy stuff would also be way easier. Like in general, like it's a hard problem to figure out the dependency graph.
Right.
And also we would be listing, you know, we would be automatically listing the files in the package.json files field, right? Like that's something we've explored a few times adding to npm init, and it turns out it is really challenging to know which files you're going to need.
Yeah.
Yep, all the static tools dump the entire directory. So any automatic bot using this will dump all your test files too.
So can I give some feedback here? We generally think that I don't think this is something that we can support or will support in the near future. Is that accurate?
Well, it's not that we don't want to. It's that I don't think anybody knows how it would be possible.
Right.
There would
Well,
have-
Also,
actually, I think we don't want to. Can I just say, I think we don't want to. The
Sure.
point is we want authors to be able to ship what they want as the needs change. And there's lots of times where where a author might want to ship a fat package with 7 versions, and like that's actually that's a feature, not a bug.
That's a good point. And actually, every package that ships a .css file and isn't using CSS in JS, but they have pros in their README saying copy this CSS file to somewhere, like all of those would immediately break with this use case. So I think
I for sure ship
right,
bash
Wes.
scripts. For sure ship bash scripts as packages. So like there's lots of reasons why it's pretty much
Pretty
a
challenging.
requirement to just do what the package author says they want to publish.
So one area where this has come up, and I just kind of want to, I'm sure it's probably news to no one, but I just kind of want to throw it out there in this feed. One thing that people have objected to or complained about, including in packages, is the license and README files, which does end up being pretty repetitive and a considerable amount of, just bytes on disk if you install a lot of packages. The downside of omitting the license file from the package is that, I am not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer if I was, but like a lot of licenses specifically say you must include this license with all distributions of the code that it covers. So if we omit it, we're actually kind of, I don't know what law exactly we'd be breaking, but it seems like we'd be not doing what the license says we can do.
Enough
So,
people have filed issues on old packages I maintain that don't have a license file, saying that their legal team requires one because the license, they say the license requires one. That I think that enough lawyers believe that that's a requirement, that it doesn't matter if it actually is or not.
I mean, if enough lawyers believe it, then that is the law, right? Like that's how
Also
that's
true.
kind of how it works.
I can
So-
speak firsthand for like when I worked at Google, if there wasn't an explicit license file in a repo on GitHub, we were not supposed to send patches upstream. And that policy is a publicly available policy that you can find.
Yeah.
So,
But as far as like, even as far as like, can we make it easy to default what files you should include in your package? If you have a defined main, here's a kind of the thinking was like you've defined a main, and maybe in modern world you've defined some specific exports, which is kind of like main plus, right? You've said these are the things you can require. We can start from all those entry points, the bin, the main, and the exports, and follow the chain of requires, and maybe helpfully suggest like, hey, these are the files you probably just need to list. The downside of doing this is, like Wes said, there's a lot of cases where that's just not enough, where things, do an fs.read file of a text file that they want to dump as like a binary, help output or something like that. So it's very hard.
Bradley, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I don't know if it's ever been discussed before, but the only way I could see this feasibly working is if packages, when they're published, effectively listed multiple packages that they were going to do, multiple distributions. So like somebody mentioned, you could support 7 different versions of your package. Who knows? I think maybe a recommendation that we could do would be to tell people if they want more minimal ones, they're going to have to publish separate packages for all those, because that's effectively the only thing you could do under the hood.
Right. Wes, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, so we've successfully avoided the problem that they're trying to point out by having this conversation, because we focused on the solution they proposed. So the problem, which I've actually run into at my previous company, we had to do some configuration changes on our CI servers because the node modules were blowing up the inodes. It was literally just number of files, right? That was causing our CI servers to fail to build, failed next installs or whatever. I think Node was complaining about inodes. I can't remember exactly, the error was years ago. So the problem they're trying to point out is and it is real, that real applications install so many packages which contain so many files that are often unnecessary that it causes real work by engineering teams. There are ways to help resolve that. So I would, it might be valuable to redirect this person toward that as stating the problem more clearly if they are having a problem they are running into, because that might help. Because, for example, like what PNPM is doing was just trying to solve a real problem that NPM has, right? With their hard linking stuff, or I can't remember exactly how they do it anymore, but, and it's possible that future things with like Tink style may actually be what this person is looking for in the long run. And you can still solve the problems with the legal teams and the licenses and all that other stuff in more creative ways than just having like this sort of explicit production file list or static analysis to do it. So yeah, and I think anyway, I don't want to like squander. I don't want to tell this person, personally, I wouldn't tell this person, this isn't a real problem, we're not going to solve it. I would say something like, the way you're proposing we solve it isn't going to work, but maybe you could spend some time thinking about like alternate proposals that, or maybe just even elaborating on the problem more, because it is a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, a virtual file system is a good way to solve this, right? If there was a way to just say like, okay, I want to fetch everything that I need from node modules, but only fetch the files that I actually load, then you solve the inode problem, or at least you make it a smaller problem, and in such a way that it's not even requiring any change on the package author part. And not requiring us to know at install time everything that you're possibly going to need.
Yeah.
Do we think this is accurate in terms of some feedback? Just to summarize and potentially answer this. So I'm responding essentially saying that, based on this discussion a bit, this is not something necessarily we think we can solve for. And a recommendation that we might have is, they can potentially like fork whatever packages they have and only, create a smaller package that only contains, essentially production files. That's one way, I guess, the current ecosystem is solving for those, right?
Yeah, that's pretty tedious, though. If you're, you have a couple thousand steps, like.
Sure. Yeah.
The way I read this response is saying this is not a problem we're interested in, even though I do think it is fundamentally a problem, because otherwise why would Tink exist, right? And why would PNPM's approach exist, right?
So like the virtual file system is definitely something that I guess you're saying is on the roadmap in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Should I mention that one way that we? Sure. Okay.
I think that would help this person not feel put off.
And that's definitely not my intent.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Another concept we have floated.
Don't we have another conversation about different types of package publications somewhere, Wes?
There was one that was closed. There's a legacy issue that I know, Getify, forget his name, has floated in the past in terms of like having multiple packages or multiple types of one package. So like a production package.
There's been a lot of discussion about this in the past. I mean, the classes of problems that people want to solve here. This one is just kind of disk space, right? But then there's also like, I want to publish my test files, but I don't want to force all my users to download them every time. And that's something that the only solution is if NPM supports multiple tarballs with the same package version. But then there's the other class, which is like, I want to publish an ES5 version and an ES6 version and a Node 15 version of my package. And the solution to all of those, I think, involves some design around NPM accepting pretty much multiple tarballs, I think, on publish for a package. And
I mean, the
every
state
time
of the
that's
art on
come
that
up,
is,
it's been pushed back.
Yeah, the state of the art on that is you bump the major between each of those, and you run multiple release trains. Like it's
right. I mean, that's the only, that different package names or different or multiple release trains of the same package are you're right, the only real ways of solving that. I guess the other ways is you just include everything in a different folder in the same package, right? But it's like those are your choices. So I think that if at any point NPM as a group changes their minds about the viability of supporting multiple tarballs with a package version, then great. But until then, I don't think there's any other solution here.
well, and there's some real hazards and caveats with doing that, right? If you because then we basically get to a spot where the assumption that name at version on a particular registry maps to one definite thing, and it will always be that definite thing, is like no longer holds true, right? Then we have like another element in that vector that we need to consider.
I mean, you could imagine that it's package and version and like variant or something. But yeah, and then of course there's a separate question of, well, how do you ensure that the like, you know, ES5 version and the ES6 version are actually just different syntax of the same code, the same logic, right? Like, and really the only way to know that is if the build process is run inside NPM or something, which is not tenable. So like there is definitely a lot of yak shaving around that kind of feature, but I just don't think that there's for everything except disk space, which like Tink and Yarn 2 solution and so on. Like I don't think there's really another viable solution that's not NPM registry side.
Yep.
I think at some point OS even proposed like a kind of substandard using just the current registry, just formalizing this way of publishing multiple tarballs for each target.
I think I did, but I've been thinking about this problem a bunch lately, and I just didn't. I don't think that was I think all of these solutions are generally pretty bad ideas in the long run.
Okay. Well, just to be mindful of time here, I know we're about a minute over, and appreciate everybody jumping on here. I'm gonna do some wordsmithing and try to make this sound encouraging and also outline sort of everything we've discussed. I want to note again, I said at the beginning of the call, I want to say it again, I appreciate everybody and your support over this past year and joining us in these calls. It's been super helpful, and I want to continue it, and I think we've done a lot of great work. And yeah, I want to wish everybody a happy new year, and hopefully if you're taking holidays, you have safe holidays wherever you are. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for joining us, and hopefully we can keep the discussion going for the next little while. We'll be back in the new year, January 6th, 2021. So yeah, if I don't talk to you before then, take care.
Take care. Have awesome holidays.
All right.